This is fun. I haven't actually seen this clip because I was like just about to go on air and this clip came down the pipeline. So I get to react in real time, which I never get to do. But as I understand it, this is exactly what Adam was just talking about. And Jim Watson, the mayor of Ottawa, again, resorting to hearsay, talking about violence, which no one has actually seen. So let's play this clip from just under an hour ago.
Mayor Watson, let me just ask you, you told us earlier today, where evidence came out that these protesters, they were nasty, they were hateful, and they were vulgar. Is that right?
Yes.
And you said that you saw, or you said that they had ripped masks off of people.
Yes.
Did you actually see that?
No, I saw it reported in the media.
Okay. And I think you also said that certain people were attacked. Is that right?
I didn't say that, no. I said that I had death threats, but I wasn't physically attacked.
No, I didn't say that you were attacked, but you said that these protesters were attacking people. Did you not say that?
No. They were disrupting people's lives, that's for sure, and they refused on at least 3 occasions that I'm aware of that they refused to adhere to the provincial mandate of wearing a mask when going into a shop or a restaurant.
So you're not aware of any incidents of physical violence from the protesters?
Well, you'd have to ask the police. I know they arrested a couple hundred people and charged a couple hundred people. I don't know what the charges were, so I'm not privy to that information.
According to your knowledge? You don't know of any?
So I don't know any.
Of any physical attacks?
Not to my own personal knowledge, no.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions.
Interesting. So it's easy to talk a big game about all the violence on the streets of Ottawa, about these protesters going out and just ripping people's masks off and all of that. But no, do you know anything about it? Yeah, no, the media. Got it from the media. Okay, well, what about the physical attacks? Do you know anything about that? Well, you got to talk to police. And I bet when we have the police witnesses testifying and they're asked the same question, they're going to be like, I don't know, talk to Jim Watson. It's just like everyone's just pointing in every other direction for this. Same as like trying to figure out who invoked the Emergencies Act is like going on a fishing expedition because no one actually asked for it. No one asked for the Emergencies Act. It came from the government of Canada. And this is something that we saw months ago whenever police agencies were testifying before Parliament, before that parliamentary committee that was investigating. We'd find out that the police, which Marco Mendicino and Justin Trudeau said asked for the Emergencies Act, couldn't actually find a single police officer that wanted it. The RCMP commissioner says, no, it wasn't us. The OPP commissioner says, no, it wasn't us. The Ottawa police chiefs, all 3 of them say, no, it wasn't us. And Jim Watson, I don't know if we have the clip of Jim Watson. I think we do. Jim Watson, this is from this morning, saying that he also did not request the invocation of the Emergencies Act.
Now, on February 14th, we know that the Emergencies Act was invoked. Were you consulted on the invocation of the Emergencies Act before it was invoked?
No, I wasn't.
Okay. Did the city request that it be invoked?
No.
Did the city weigh in on whether it was required, necessary, or needed?
Well, when it was released, I think, like most people, very few people knew exactly what the Emergencies Act was, to be perfectly honest. I remember growing up in Quebec what the War Measures Act was and the implications that had for the province of Quebec and the rest of the country. But no one had raised the Emergencies Act with us. But when it was invoked and I was briefed on what its powers were, I thought this is a very positive step to getting this situation resolved once and for all because of the provisions in the Act. So I very much supported it, and I was, as you may recall, the current chair of the Police Service Board, Eli El-Shantir, and I sent a letter to the Prime Minister thanking him for invoking the Act because it actually acted as the catalyst for us to move forward and get that whole situation in the downtown core resolved once and for all and give people their street and their homes back.
So what Jim Watson said there is that, yeah, when he learned about it, when he found out the government was already doing it, he was supportive of it. But he was like, no one's even heard of this thing before. How do we ask for this thing no one had ever heard of, which I found quite interesting. So Ottawa didn't ask for it. yesterday, Ontario Premier Doug Ford reminded us all, which I don't think he should be bragging about, that he supported the use of it, but didn't request it. In fact, one of the big sources or one of the big products of testimony this week is that the Ontario government was just so disengaged from this process. There was this record of a phone call between Justin Trudeau and Jim Watson during the convoy where they're all just like trashing Doug Ford for like not wanting to get involved for political reasons. So it's actually quite sad because Doug Ford does this whole buddy-buddy routine talking about how great Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland are. And behind his back, they're talking about how terrible he is and they don't like him and don't respect what he's doing. And he's not their ally on this issue, even though publicly Ford is saying he supports this thing. But we haven't yet found anyone who wanted this thing and asked for it, who asked the government to do it. So we're left with this idea that the government was the one that wanted it on its own. The government wanted to do it. And we've been hearing all sorts of testimony for the last 2 days. Yesterday was particularly insightful because we heard from Steve Kanellakis, who's the Ottawa city manager, and also Serge Arpin, who's the chief of staff to Jim Watson. And they were talking about their negotiations with the convoy leaders, with the convoy organizers. Negotiations that, by the way, resulted in a successful agreement to relocate trucks onto Wellington Street, away from residential neighborhoods. An agreement we talked about on the show back in February when it came out. And they all said, yeah. And what we heard this morning and what we heard yesterday, most notably, was that it wasn't the convoy protesters that pulled the plug on that agreement. What it was the Parliamentary Protective Service that didn't like it. And then the Ottawa Police, which moved to an enforcement posture once the Emergencies Act came into play. So they were the ones that pulled the plug on this deal, not the members of the convoy. And these things are so critical because right now I have seen no evidence of an actual emergency, no evidence of a bona fide emergency, certainly not one that would justify these unprecedented powers by the federal government. And we've just been hearing about the effect on the ground in Ottawa. We haven't even been hearing testimony yet on the bank account freezes. We heard a little bit from the government in Ottawa about how they really were having trouble getting tow truck drivers because tow truck drivers were not wanting to tow trucks because they were sympathetic to the convoy. And I did an interview that you'll see tonight with Ezra Levant at Rebel News. And Ezra pointed out that the ability to just commandeer a tow truck, which the federal government claimed it needed the Emergencies Act for, actually exists in the criminal code as it is. So it wasn't even like needing to just conscript tow truck drivers against their will to get involved was something that needed the Emergencies Act. It was the bank account freezes. And that's the part we haven't actually gotten to yet. And the government can try to muddle this as much as they want. The government can try to make this an inquiry into the convoy. They can try to string up Tamara Leach. They can try to make this all about the protesters that were fed up with vaccine mandates. But they cannot hide from their own role in this. And what they did is decide that the right to protest no longer exists. The right to peacefully assemble no longer exists. That the government's refusal to engage with people is supposedly the way you respond to a problem, and then you go to the last resort despite not even having given the courtesy of a conversation along the way. And I don't know if there's going to be a smoking gun of some kind that shows some wrongdoing by government. That summary I talked about earlier of the phone call between Justin Trudeau and Jim Watson. It was like a page and a half, and there were several lines redacted, including some like mid-sentence where they just start redacting something. And you look at that and you say, what is it that they're hiding? And maybe it's nothing. Maybe Jim Watson said something about his kids in there that is not supposedly for public consumption. But already you're starting to see areas where the government is just concealing little bits and pieces. The government doesn't want there to actually be the accountability that we know is required. Now, I'll tell people, as much as I don't think the government has a leg to stand on this invocation of the Emergencies Act, I also would be remiss to not point out that this is just one of a number of battles that is right now underway. Constitutional challenges, criminal cases, numerous constitutional challenges, by the way. and not just by people who were charged, but by civil liberties groups like the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, the Canadian Constitution Foundation, the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. The government of Alberta is engaged in that battle as well. Jason Kenney joined, and now Danielle Smith, the premier, has decided to continue that. So these are all very important distinctions and discussions here. This is just one particular battle, but I maintain it's the simplest one and has the clearest question. Was this a national emergency? Was this a national emergency? Was this something that had espionage and sabotage, or did it just have phantom honking and microaggressions? Which sound comical. It does. And I mean, laugh at it. It's going to be a long 7 weeks. You got to have some fun with it. But the fact that that was being entertained is an example to me of the attempt by a lot of the people that applied to appear as witnesses to really muddy the waters here and try to inject a bunch of extraneous detail that may help paint a picture, but doesn't really help the commissioner reach that fundamental finding of whether the government's use of the Emergencies Act was appropriate or whether it was inappropriate.